Today I have a guest, or perhaps maybe not a guest, maybe I'm more of a guest to Salmon Trout Steelheader than this man himself. Nick Amato has been the editor of Salmon Trout Steelheader and Great Lakes Angler for how long, Nick?
Oh boy, it's been about 25 years now.
Absolutely. So going through multiple issues each year. When did Great Lakes Angler start under Frank Amato Publications?
Oh, I'd say it's been about 7 years now.
Just 7 years doing that as well. So Nick is kind of not only seen a lot and read a lot from his editing, but fished a lot as well. I mean, over the years, you put in some serious time over some rivers. So let's talk about summer steelhead. And this is kind of a strange topic to speak about, I guess, this year because it's such a lackluster year on the coast and in the Columbia and around where you're from. But perhaps that's a reason why it's good to kind of focus in on the details. So let's talk about your home river, per se. The one that you fish the absolute most and that you live on. With that river, when it comes to summer steelhead, and I'm not even really referring to this year in particular, but do steelhead surprise you in where they hold and what they eat?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's a very complicated subject and a little bit difficult to answer without being a little bit more specific, but that's the beauty of fishing for summer steelhead. You can use a variety of techniques. They're in the river for a long time. They migrate sometimes at different speeds. You know, some will hold lower in the river, some will shoot up high. They tend to move around, and depending on the conditions, you can use so many different things to pursue them.
Yeah, so when they first are entering the river, what are you perhaps in the earlier stages, the early months of summer steelhead fishing, what are you going to look for a summer steelhead with?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is, and I keep it real simple, is talk to a group of fishing friends and see if they're in or not. Some years they come in, as early as late March. Some years they're not in fishable numbers till the end of April. And so first I'll find out what's going on there. When there's not that much pressure on them, I'll try to seek out known areas that produce at that time of the year. And again, it can depend on the water level. You might, in high water conditions, you're going to fish totally different than you might say in lower conditions. So it's like high water, I might fish out of a sled and maybe side drift form. Low water, definitely be out of a drift boat or from shore. And then even in high water, there's certain areas where you can find them easily from shore too.
Yeah, so it'd be kind of a similar game plan to like winter steelhead fishing. But now when it moves into these deep dog days of summer and we've got really hot weather, warmer water temperatures, what can you do? Say, I would say on a year like this year, it'd be really tough and it'd be better to focus, farther down in the rivers, I would say at this time. But if there's more fishable numbers of summers in the year, and there's fish around, but you've got people floating on tubes like you've got all the time, how would you start to target those really low clear water summers?
So there's a number of different things that I would think about. The first one would be to get out there early in the morning, like right at daylight or just before daylight, and kind of know where some pods of fish might be, maybe in the holes near either acclimation points or near the hatchery, or in places maybe below an island where there's deeper water and it's holding the fish up because they don't want to go through those channels in the low water. And if the water gets warm enough, sometimes they will move into choppy water or riffles. So it would depend. And then in the evening, now it's definitely not going to be as good on a sunny day with people floating down the river on on rainbow colored rafts.
Yeah, so but if you were to try to have a shot at them, what would you do if you knew there was a couple steelhead that been rafted over 42 times, but it'd been an hour since that had happened?
So in those situations, you're going to be better off in the chop. I'd go look for places above where the most of the activity's gone through, or get below, like at the bottom of the drifts, where the activity's not as high. But I have caught summer steelhead on a sunny day right between the rafts, either using jigging a float or different types of baits, or these days everybody's using shrimp.
Absolutely. So what about in the chop? What would you do for those fish that are in the shallow water?
Well, what I used to like to do was take a size 3 spinner, and maybe take a dark marking pen and maybe color up half the blade, or darken out like the back side of the blade sometimes, and if the body's shiny, kind of dull it up, and then sweep that through the riffles. And it may not be as effective as certain types of bait or jigs, but when you get a strike, it's a lot more fun, because they really, sometimes they'll chase it and grab it and turn and run. And if you're using a light rod, it's really fun. And sometimes you can see them chase it some distance, especially in the low, clear flow of summer. And even if you don't get bit, just having one chase it, and 7, 8, 9, 12 pound rainbow in crystal clear water on a sunny day, right there, running right up to your feet, and then turning around, and boy, if they grab it, all the better, because boy, they're going to take off.
Oh yeah,
you're going to be screaming with joy.
Yeah. Now, what about when some of those early fall Chinook or A-run coho start showing up? What do you see happening with the steelhead?
Well, the coho don't seem to bother the summer steelhead as much. In fact, when the coho show up, sometimes the summer steelhead are actually going on a better bite, because at least those early run fish in some rivers, the water temp will drop. Literally, the nighttime temps will go down, the coho will show up, and it seems like at the same time, some of the stale summer steelhead that have been schooled up in deep holes will reactivate and start moving around, and then maybe even some fresh ones will come in. And so they seem to, you can catch coho and summer steelhead at the same time, and it's very common, especially in September in some rivers. Now the kings, that's a little bit different story. The some rivers you got your summer kings and springers, and then fall fish, and some of them will tend to start spawning in September. And if there's a lot of kings around, you probably aren't. The steelhead will either be at the very back or front end of those pools, or they will leave, because the kings tend to disturb them. The summer steelhead.
Absolutely. So what about those early coho? You live in an area that has those A-run coho that are very difficult to get on the chomp. So what are you going to start doing in those cases?
Well, so again, the one can't miss technique is to beat everybody to a good spot. So I mean, that's as old as time, but it does happen to work sometimes, especially if you're using a method that may not be as effective as other methods, but a method that you enjoy employing. So if you're there first, you might get the 2 fish that would have bit anything. So you can strip a fly across the top of them, or throw out a big spoon or spinner, and you might get that one fish, which could just totally make your day. Whereas if you got there an hour later and there's 5, 6 guys on the pool and they're throwing everything at them, they put down those easy biters. That's why oftentimes you'll have like spay fishermen and fly fishermen want rested pools, or they want their own water, because they're looking for those aggressive fish, and that they can be put down quickly if you're pounding over the top of them. But then, with that said, then I'll just go to whatever seems to be working for that time of the year. One thing I've been using a lot lately are spinners of different types. So I just enjoy fishing in a spinner. A twitching jig may work a little bit better, so I'll use those, especially midday. The trick with this twitching, I think you get the same amount of bites on a spinner versus a twitching jig. And then of course you throw the plugs in there too, but with the twitching jig, the coho come up and they don't necessarily grab the lure very hard. They kind of suck it in, spit it out, suck it in, spit it out. But when you're twitching, you'll hook those fish because if the jig's going up and down, the
Oh,
hook's
you
sticking
mean
to the top.
you mean with the spinner? Because you said with the jig.
Yeah,
So you mean
with
with the spinner they won't?
Yeah,
hit
with
it?
the spinner they will grab it and you won't feel the bite.
Really?
So sometimes you have to literally feel for the blade to stop spinning to feel that and set the hook immediately.
Interesting. Yeah.
I've watched this from tops of pools from Alaska down here all over the place and looked down into holes full of coho, and you could see guys just hooking or getting one bite after another and not catching anything. I'm just watching. Wow, that guy had 3 bites on that cast, and he never set the hook because he didn't know he had a bite.
Wow.
So, especially those early run coho, the late runs too, bite like that sometimes, but they're not just going to grab it, turn, and run away. With your perfect bite. They're very touchy. Now, again, the twitching jig kind of takes that out of it because by twitching, you're going to hook
But it
those
still
fish.
happens. It certainly happens.
Oh yeah, that
where
certainly will.
You won't feel it, and they'll let it go. But yeah, that's interesting. So for the A-run coho, you are saying that sometimes when they do bite, they're just biting extremely lightly.
Right. And again, that's with like spinners, and then you got your twitching jigs, and then, I mean, if you have to in the rivers where it's legal, a lot of guys will switch to the bobbers and eggs, and if you get that tuned in properly, sometimes that's what you have to do to catch a fish in some of these rivers with the hatchery fish that are tough biters.
Yeah, totally. So, but that time of year, coho, kings, summer steelhead, that kind of August, September time, what's your favorite thing to do?
So locally anyway, I mean, obviously my favorite thing would be to maybe go to Alaska somewhere, but
Yep, of course.
But locally, I would say I like to pursue those late season summer steelhead. There have been times where they have piled up in certain rivers that I fish, big schools of them. Obviously not this year, but in the past, and I've located them. And then by June, July, people aren't fishing for them anymore, and they're still beautiful fish. They can get into the high teens and schooled up. They'll be over flats in certain holes. And then if nobody's around, you can go up there and use a variety of techniques, including little spinners or flies or fly rods with indicators, what have you, and catch a few of these fish. They actually fight as well or better than an early run fish because they're just rested up sitting there, and they got a little bit of red on them usually, but still beautiful fish. And then you can mix that trip up with floating down the river and then pursuing the coho if they happen to be in at the same time. So that would be like the perfect trip where you've got a mix like that.
So those late run fish, maybe before the rains hit, what type of water are you looking for? What part of the river?
So for steelhead?
For the later steelhead.
So the later steelhead, and I'm talking about Skamania hatchery summer steelhead here. They in general will end up a high percentage of them either near wherever they were acclimated or planted. Now they won't all go right there. A lot of them will stray and they'll be all over the place, but in general you can start hunting near those areas and then work your way out. So some of the situations I'm talking about were near acclimation areas or the hatchery, and then maybe up to a mile away. And then what I like to do is maybe float down the river and just playing around, but look into all the holes, and sometimes you can see the schools of summer steelhead, or you can see them spread around certain flats, and it's like, okay, well this year they're in spots A, B, C, D, and E, so then I'll know, okay, they're hanging in this general area of the river, and then go back, and I've done it so many times in certain rivers, I already know where they're going to end up, and not necessarily in the two pools right next to the hatchery. And then there's other things that can happen, like say you've got a river that has a large run of fish going further up it, but the water gets warm in the summer, and some of those fish could dip into a cooler, lower trib. So maybe the first 2 or 3 miles of that trib is full of fish, and there's lots of places on the Columbia where this happened in the past. And what we're talking about here is the Clackamas River. Sometimes the lower Clackamas River will have Santiam and Mackenzie, upper Willamette fish dip in.
Interesting.
And depending on the water temp, sometimes they're difficult to get to bite if the water temp gets high in the lower Clackamas, but but if you hit it early in the morning, sometimes you can have some really good fishing and nobody around. So all these situations are very low pressure. This year it'll be no pressure with the amount of fish around, but
yeah, and I mean there's people who are, you know, if you're really familiar with the holes and the rivers and the runs, there are people getting them, but they're having to put in a lot of time that in past years they never had to do.
Right. So here's the most important thing. I really got serious about fishing, really serious in the 90s, and those were low return years. So I learned that it's probably the most important thing is to work hard to catch a fish that you're going to remember. Those are the days you're never going to forget. If you worked hard, maybe sometimes work hard 2-3 days, all day fishing. I mean, I used to hike rivers from daylight till dark, you know, and looking for that one great grab. And, you know, and then the fishing got a lot better and techniques got better. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're catching multiple fish and you're shooting for numbers and everybody's getting a little bit spoiled. And I always go back to thinking that, you know, geez, it's just the special moments and the ones that you worked really hard for that can mean a lot more. Say you made your own spinner and you just wanted to catch a fish on that spinner you made. Your buddy goes out with shrimp, catches 5 steelhead, and he's like, why don't you use these shrimp? You know, I'm catching all the fish. What are you doing? And it's like it's going to mean a lot more to you to catch that one fish on a spinner you made.
For sure. Yeah, there's a special connection with different techniques that we do and different things, but you're a pretty pragmatic fisherman, I guess, over the years with gear and fly and everything. So where do you kind of, you know, if you have your druthers, what do you prefer to do?
Well, that's a really complicated question again to answer, but I mean, if I could just do anything, and then I'd probably get tired of it after a while, I would just catch B-run summer steelhead on dry flies, preferably with an upstream dead drift, with a hand-tied fly or maybe a traditional fly tied by somebody famous, you know. But that aside,
do you think you could get tired of it?
You probably would if it was too easy.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is, I remember one time I was super excited. I crawled and scratched my way into an upper tributary trying to find wild summer steelhead up on the peninsula, and I finally found this air-clear pool below waterfalls way in the middle of nowhere, no trails, nothing. So here's all these wild summer steelhead, and I got one to come up to a dry fly. One fish would have bit anything you put in there.
Yeah.
And then it was over because it was just crystal clear, and those fish scattered like you couldn't believe. They didn't have anywhere to go.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was pretty cool. But I'll tell you what, just probably the neatest thing on earth would be to just get off work, hit 2 holes on the way home, and pick up a fish every few days. I mean, it's pretty hard to top that.
For sure.
Any technique.
We are so blessed to live where we do. Me being in Woodland, you being over here, I mean, so much access to different places like that, and all it takes is one good steelhead year. But I do not mean to decry fishing by any means, because we have phenomenal salmon fishing going on here. The ocean is off the hook for coho.
Right.
Everything's looking good for kings. So we've had these difficult years of steelhead, but how do you look at the salmon runs these days?
Well, they've been fairly solid in the Columbia River, and apparently the ocean conditions are good off of Northern California, Oregon, Washington. They're catching limitless numbers of coho right now, and hopefully that's a sign of good things to come.
Well, I'll tell you what, I saw one of those 8-run football upriver fish the other day. Was nice to see, you know, those 1 or 2 years.
Absolutely. Those are some of those fish are going to travel a long ways, and if you catch them in the lower river like that, they're a lot of fun.
And you fished them all the way down from right near the ocean all the way up to how far have you fished summer steelhead? Basically to where they stop?
Well, I just, up the Snake, Clearwater up that way, I guess.
Yeah, so
maybe a little further up.
Pretty incredible fish as far as timing goes and all that stuff. What would you say for steelhead, kind of your favorite 5-year period or stretch.
Well, absolutely. So I went through the 90s, and then in about the year 99, for sure 2000, the numbers went off the charts, and all that hard work I put in the 90s really paid off, and able to almost catch summer steelhead on command. There were so many.
Yeah.
And, I got to say, that was pretty fun.
Absolutely, man. And so a pretty special time period. That was approximately 4 years after the flood, correct? Was it 96
Yeah,
flood?
there was a 96 flood. I'm not
Do you think that
sure
had
how
anything to do with it?
It may.
had
I'm
to
not
have.
really sure how that would have affected things, but because it was...
Perhaps predation?
It was coast-wide. I mean, it happened all the way from Sacramento to...
Well, I wonder if that just flushed every bit of fry and such out to the ocean without any predation because the birds can't get to them.
It's possible, and I've definitely heard that theory expressed many times.
Who knows, but it would be nice to have it back, but I in the meantime, scratching around for the steelhead, and then we've got phenomenal Chinook and coho fishing to do. So when it comes to fall Chinook, is that something you enjoy doing? And if you do it, what do you do for them?
Well, again, there's so many opportunities. And, there are some issues with some of the runs because of the drought we've been having for some time now. But boy, you've got so many opportunities. So you can pursue them in the smaller coastal streams. You can pursue them all up and down the Columbia River. Mm-hmm. From here, they're in just about every tributary. So I guess I try to maybe attempt to pursue ones that, because some of them, darken up fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. Pursue them in different areas where they're still feel like you could eat one.
Yeah.
So I kind of seek that out, I guess you would say.
Yeah. So the lower river fisheries, and bays and such.
Right. But depending on the run, like the Columbia, for example, those fish are traveling a lot longer, so they stay nice for a lot longer. Mm-hmm. So I guess I look at that, and then obviously try to catch a big one. Everybody wants to catch a 50-pounder, so think about that a little bit.
Yeah. So where'd the 50-pounders go? What do you think?
Well, I think that we're just in a big cycle right now, and Tillamook Bay used to always have good-sized fish, so I'm sure there's still some, and I'm sure they'll be back in numbers again at some point. Mm-hmm. And shoot, up in Washington, what's a good river up there for big ones?
Well, I mean, even the Cowlitz and Lewis had giants as of 6 years ago or something.
Yeah. So I mean, you can still catch a big king just about anywhere. Just the average size seems to be smaller right now, but they're still out there.
Definitely bigger on the Washington coast as you get up the peninsula, it would seem. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I really love the grab of one taking like a plug of a wrapped plug. I really like that strike. Or back bouncing and feel. I guess I like to feel the bite.
For sure. Yeah. Back bouncing, that is
because big fish like that can really crush something.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Nick has done a number of videos with STS for going back a couple decades here, and one of them, River Kings, is on YouTube. You can watch the entire thing on YouTube. I would definitely recommend checking out the Salmon Trout Steelheader YouTube channel and watching River Kings. And when approximately was that filmed?
Boy, I don't know exactly. Something like 205 maybe. Mm-hmm. Something like that. And you were doing a lot of quick fish and back bouncing and things like that. Right, yeah. So most of the methods are covered, and there was some really good fishing going on at that period of time. Yeah, some powerful fish, and looks like a lot of fun. That was kind of in the heyday of quick fish and madness. We were fishing with Chris Olson in that video, who's his son's on the cover of the current issue. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so that was good. And then there's also, the side drifting for steelhead, the drift fishing for steelhead, the STS classics, we're calling them, and they're up on the YouTube channel now. So if you guys could comment and let us know what you're thinking of our podcast, and we thank you for your likes and comments. It's a great way to just support easily. And to those of you who are subscribed to the magazine, we want to thank you so much. And go
Go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, leave a like. We appreciate all of you. And hey, Nick, thanks for chatting on the podcast here. But we're going to have some video content coming up as soon as Nick gets freed up from some of his work here. So
Sounds good. Yeah, enjoyed talking with you, Lucas.
for sure, this episode brought to you by fishfield.com. Go take a look. Amazing Daiwa selection and products. There's new products for 2021. Fishfield.com. Thanks again, folks. Take care.